Hi there, I'm Woolly Wormhead and welcome to my channel. In today's tutorial, I'd like to talk to you about the crochet cast-on and using it at the end of a row or even mid-row if you wanted to. Now, the crochet cast-on family are one of my favorite cast-on families. They're incredibly versatile. You have the provisional crochet cast-on, which is where you use waste yarn and you take that out. Provisional cast-on is a temporary cast-on, so you use it and you take it out through go on and graft or do whatever you might want to do with the stitches. You can use it as a permanent cast on and get these lovely lines of V's along the bottom, which perfectly mirror a standard bind off and also look really lovely in combination with a slip stitch selvage. And you can use it in the middle of a row. It's one of those cast ons that you can just kind of like carry on wherever you might be. Doesn't require any other kind of setup. You just go with it. So let's switch to the overhead and I'll show you how you can do that. Okay then, I have here a swatch ready to go to show you how to do the crochet cast on at the end of a row. It's got a crochet cast on down here. Use the crochet cast on as a permanent cast on, which is done exactly the same way as the provisional one, except for you use it in your main yarn. I've got tutorials for that. And then a slipped stitched selvage down the side to match the line of V's. Again, I've got a tutorial for that. And then a kind of cast stitch border here just to kind of a few rows and a few stitches here just to stop it curling in completely. Now, when you come to do the cast on at the end of the row, you can either do it at the end or at the beginning. It doesn't really matter which ways makes most sense to you and feels most comfortable. But what we want to do this, we need to use the last stitch along here. We slip this off and this becomes the stitch that we have on our hook so we can continue making the chain. What we've got to remember is that the stitch, when we take it away and put it on the hook, the stitch count along here is going to be one stitch short. When we are casting on and we go to count our stitches, we have to remember that that one stitch belongs to this group here. All right. So when we do the crochet cast on as a permanent cast on, we cast on one stitch less and we put the stitches on the hook on to complete the cast on. We are going to do the same at the end here. We've just got to remember that stitch belongs to these and isn't part of the stitches that are cast on, at least not from a stitch count perspective. So we slip that off, put it onto the hook, and away we go by bringing our yarn around, back of the needle, hook over the front, get through, back around between the needle and the hook, and you do it that way. Now, I'm finding this a little bit uncomfortable because of the way that the knitting is weighted. It's making it hard for me to hold the needle in the way that I'd want to do. So I'm just going to put a few more on and show you how it finishes, and then I'll show you how you can do it at the beginning of the row to get the same effect, which you might find more comfortable, as I do. Now the last stitch cast on, don't forget to put the yarn back between so that we are ready to knit. If you are going to be purling, then you would want that yarn to stay forward so you can go to purl. But we're going to be knitting across. So there we have the crochet cast on coming up from the slip stitch selvage where we did it at the end of the row. And you maintain that lovely line of V's. Now I'm going to unpick that. We're back to that stitch. And I'm going to do it at the beginning of the row from the right side of the work because I find it more comfortable with the knitting on this side. And it's probably just the way that the fabric that's on the needle is causing the needle to bias, swing one way. I find it more comfortable with my knitting style. But it's the same thing. You're doing exactly the same thing. And so if we want to knit the first stitch, we put the yarn in between. If we want to purl, we leave the yarn where it is, and then we go from there to put that stitch back on, because then whichever way the yarn is helps us kind of get set up for the row that follows. And there we have that lovely line of bees. It looks exactly the same whether you do it at the beginning or at the end of the row. You still have to work across from this side So whether you do it at the beginning of the row or not, or at the end on the wrong side, makes no difference. It's still technically at the end of the row because you have to work across it and work into the next row from the right side to make it part of the knitting. And there we have that lovely lullaby there. And it's a nice edge there. It's really nice if you're working on a sideways project, like I tend to do sometimes. You can have a section here that's extended out, and then you can use a standard bind off at the end. I've done sideways knit hats with ear flaps where they have been cast on with the crochet cast on and then bound off with standard bind off, and you get lovely mirrored edges. And if you know me, you know that I like those kinds of details. I think it adds a refinement to our knitting. All right, so I'm going to knit to the end of the row, and I'm going to prepare for the next swatch to show you how to cast on in the middle of a row. Okay, there we are. Okay, for this next demo, I'm going to show you how to do the crochet cast on mid row on this garter stitch swatch here. What I've done is I've bound off using the standard bind off method, 5 stitches in the middle. I'm now going to cast on 5 stitches over the top, so that it can be like a buttonhole, or it could be any kind of detail that has a nice opening to it. But this is another way that you can use this cast on mid row. I mean, it doesn't have to have a corresponding bind off to be useful. You can use it mid row to, I don't know, create a picot mid row if you wanted to create some sort of texture detail that comes out from the fabric, something a little more 3-dimensional or tactile. So we knit to that point there. We're going to hop this last stitch that we knit onto the crochet hook. Now, remembering that I said that I bound off 5 stitches. So let's bring that around. We are going to cast on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we pop that one back on. Remember that what I said before, that stitch belongs to the stitch count down here. And then we're just going to carry on to the end of the row. We can already see that that's starting to look nice and mirrored. I'm just going to knit across it, so we've got a little bit of a body of fabric across the top. Join up the stitches. Because I find that when I cast on in the middle of the row like this, I'm never quite sure if I've got the exact tension right until I put a row or 2 on top. Because there's often sometimes a little loop here or there when you do it in the middle of the row as you join the cast on stitches to the body of the fabric. It usually evens out, but I like to do a couple of rows before I decide whether I want to rework it. And there we have. There's the crochet cast on, there's the standard bind off. And considering that I did them all on the same size needles, that doesn't look too bad at all. I'm rather pleased with that. So that's one way you can do this. You can do it for buttonholes, picots, all sorts of things, really. And I thought I'd just show you one final useful tip for using the crochet cast on at the end or beginning of a row. Especially if you're working my Cubetti pattern or any of my cuboidals where we have picking up stitches along the edges of a crochet cast on or a slip stitch selvage. I've picked up a row of stitches here, and if we want to go ahead and knit another square or knit on in another way, we are going to need to do a cast on of some kind. And if we do the crochet cast on, it keeps everything consistent and it makes our edges much easier for picking up. So we pop that last stitch on there. This way round, you kind of have to do it with the fabric down here. Actually, no, you could probably try the other way if you wanted to. But we are casting on with the right side facing here, so it's a little bit different to the other example. And so you would do exactly the same, cast on however many stitches you need, remembering that the stitch that's on the hook belongs to the stitch count that was picked up. And then you would go ahead and make whatever needs to come next. All right, I'm not going to do the whole thing, just to give you an idea. When you come to knit across, those will all line up and you'll get those V's all lining up along the edge there. And that's what it looks from the wrong side. And that's what it looks like from the right side. Okay. I hope that's given you a little insight into how versatile and adaptable the crochet cast-on is. It's not just provisional, it's not just a permanent cast-on. It's one of those that you can use mid-row, which makes it incredibly useful for, yeah, buttonholes or adding on extending sections to your fabric, especially because it matches the slip stitch selvage and the crochet cast-on, standard bind off, etc. Or you get all that lovely edge all the way around to them. I think it's really, really useful, especially because it's a nice edge for picking up stitches. I mean, you can do the same with cable cast-on, but it's not as pretty and it doesn't match the selvages in the same way. So, you know, this one's probably my favorite more than the cable cast-on family because of that continuity that you get all the way around and the ease with picking up stitches. If you found this helpful, I would very much appreciate it if you could do the like, hype, and subscribe thing, and help me grow my channel. It'd be much appreciated. And I hope you give some of these techniques a try. All right, see you next time.